We are now joined via Zoom by legal and transformation practitioner Thabo Masombuka. Mr. Masombuka, thank you so much for your time this afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me. Good afternoon to your viewers too.
Now, while some have not fully come out to support or welcome this appointment, seeing it as one that goes against the Judicial Service Commission's recommendations, a number of entities believe that the appointment of Justice Zondo is a strategic move by the president and a good decision for the country. What are your thoughts?
Thank you very much. It was always going to be a contested terrain. Kasperi ba re ke kgomo ya moshate wa itshwara umolatu wa itlogela umolatu. So in other words, in both instances the president was always going to receive criticism, precisely because of two reasons. One, Justice Raymond Zondo, having been the acting Chief Justice, overseen one of the most controversial commissions in the country, the Zondo State of Capture Commission, and as a result got himself deeply embedded in a number of criticisms. Second, this round of the JSC, Judicial Service Commission, interviewing process took what we rather call an unprecedented pattern, where they recommended a specific candidate when in fact they shouldn't have done so. They should have just interviewed the candidates and sent a report to the president and left him to his discretion in terms of the powers that enjoins him in the Constitution in terms of Section 174. But this is not new, Zolega, remember? Remember the instance of the former Deputy Chief Justice, Dingang Moseneke, who was an acting Chief Justice at the time Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng was appointed. He dedicates a painful chapter in his book, The Judicial Memo, All Rise, where he says what he found extremely unprecedented was when the former president, Jacob Zuma, wrote to him as an acting Chief Justice at the time and informed him that I am about to appoint Judge Mogoeng Mogoeng as the Chief Justice, and you as an acting Deputy Justice initiate a process to have this person appointed. He says he found that extremely unusual, and quite frankly, for all intents and purposes, it was very painful. Imagine you being asked to initiate a process where you have legitimate expectation yourself to rise into that. So what I think through this appointment, and this is notwithstanding the fact that Justice Raymond Zondo is left with 2.5 years to retirement, what I get as a sense is that the president is trying to be corrective. In other words, is trying to be restorative of the succession pattern in the judiciary, because it is critical for the stability of that office, the judiciary. So, and you could see that he's even saying, I even have intentions to appoint Justice Mandisa Maya to take over as the Deputy Chief Justice should the new Chief Justice assume office. That tells you that there is at least some level of consideration to transformation and gender parity.
Mr. Masombuka, now on that point, that you've just mentioned in terms of Justice Maya, in fact, the president was criticized, saying that this was a missed opportunity on his part, not to appoint Justice Maya for this current position.
Fair criticism and fair comment and fair observation. But here's the trick. Like I said, President, if in his considerations and discretion wanted to be corrective, there was no way. If he appointed Judge President of the SCA, Mandisa Maya, that it means the president would have condoned and continued with the culture of disruption of the succession. And I think that's the point that we're trying to say. I was trying to say that if Justice Mandisa Maya would have been appointed, that would have confirmed the perpetuity of the culture of not following succession, where a Deputy Chief Justice is always overlooked. And it would have created the perpetuity of this precedent, and I don't think it would be quite healthy for the judiciary. My view and my suspicion, and of course the president is not expected to explain himself, is that the president wanted to be corrective, and that is why even the 2.5 years that Justice Raymond Zondo is going to be subjected to, then Justice Mandisa Maya can always rise to the highest office. The criticism or the shortfall in the debate, there is a school of thought, by the way, that says Raymond Zondo's appointment represent the capture by the president to make sure that eventually, when the case against the president that involves the unsealing of the envelopes, you remember that case when it reached the Constitutional Court, Justice Raymond Zondo would be there to oversee that. That debate is flawed, and I tell you why. It's flawed because that debate presupposes and assumes that Justice Raymond Zondo, as a Chief Justice, would have an overwhelming and ultimate veto on all the justices of the Constitutional Court. That's too shallow to think, because that court is subjected to a majority decision-making process, and if anyone has got a legally sound argument to present towards the unsealing of the envelopes, then that argument will win the end of the light of the day in the Constitutional Court, with or without Justice Zondo being at the helm.
When talking about the Judicial Service Commission and its recommendation, you mentioned the term unprecedented pattern. Now, just going back to that description, there was overwhelming criticism leveled at the JSC following the interview process. Now, just going back a little bit to Justice Maya, do you think that the actual line of question by the JSC of Justice Maya ultimately played against her, given that at the time of her interview there was criticism against the JSC that they took a softer approach and not really tested her capabilities as seen during the other three interviews?
True. And arguably, that process was, quite frankly, riddled with a whole lot of inconsistencies, politicking, factionalism, and a whole lot of character assassination behavioral tendencies. I mean, if you look at that, there was a question, for instance, towards Justice Mandisa Maya to say, do you think that women are ready to be Chief Justice? How nonsensical. I mean, women judges have been at the helm of the highest court, from Justice Yvonne Mogoro, Justice Besten Kabinde. You mentioned all of them. So that question was, quite frankly, extremely condescending. Secondly, you have questions that were leveled towards the president of the North Gauteng, for instance, based on rumor mongering that, you are applying for this position, but the allegations of sexual misconduct against you. Those questions had to be expunged of the records, for instance, of the proceedings, primarily because they were out of order. They were uncalled for, they were unnecessary, and which is demonstrative and indicative of the fact that the JSC process, until it is properly structured and formatted, is going to always play into the hands of political manipulation, political chest-beating pomperism, which sort of play itself in those processes where candidates are subjected to all manner and forms of questions, which, quite frankly, as a country, we shouldn't be interested in. Because if we listen to that process, there are three things we're interested in. Whether people are jurists, in other words, whether they'll exercise the law without fear or favor. Secondly, whether people have got leadership competency. And thirdly, whether people are suitably qualified and have the leadership acumen to lead that office. Because the head of the Chief Justice is not just in the office of the Chief Justice. He's the head of the judiciary. This is a highest office in the land, and it must coordinate all other supreme and lower courts in the country. With decisiveness and the leadership that ensures that interest of justice in this country is delivered.
I would imagine that you are also saying the same thing that a lot of analysts have been saying, that, you know, just that JSC process needs to be looked into, especially as it speaks to process and conduct. But I'm afraid that's all the time that we have for this afternoon. Thabo, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Thabo Masombuka, legal and transformation practitioner.